webinar. As you know, it's a monthly conversation about the most pressing issues affecting progress on the continent. And this conversation is generally structured towards young audience, people who are doing civil society works or in schools who are interested in understanding the questions mitigating freedom on the continent. So our guests are often young people below the age of 40, and the involvement of Linda Kavuka and Akintunde Babatunde on this call. But the question for today is pretty much two in one. We want to understand why limited government and electoral reforms are necessary on the continent, because we were supposed to discuss just one. However, we figured both, in fact, have to work hand in hand, limited government and electoral reforms. So to help us make a sense of these questions, Linda Kavuka, who is the Director of African Programs at Students for Liberty International, Managing Director of African Liberty, and she is a Trade Policy Fellow at the Consumer Choice Center. Linda holds a Master's in International Trade Law from the University of Aberdeen, a Diploma in Law from the Kenyan School of Law, and a Bachelor of Law from the University of Nairobi. Linda is an international trade lawyer, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. She is a Frederick Bastiat Fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University and an alumnus of the Atlas Network's Smith Fellowship. Impressive resume. Linda Kavuka, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Anoba.
And Akintunde Babatunde, who just joined us now. He is the Deputy Director of Development, Practice, Policy, and Research at the Center for Journalism, Innovation, and Development. His research and policy interest is in projects related to human development, agriculture, climate change, conflict, security, and transnational justice. He is the founder of Vantage Network Africa, a Chevening Scholarship alumnus and a Mandela Washington Fellow alumnus. Babatunde, he has a graduate degree in media practice for development and social change, as well as a specialization in civic engagement. He has extensive knowledge in public policy, civic technology, and media innovation. Two impressive experiences and individuals. Linda Kavuka and Babatunde, welcome to the conversation. Babatunde, can you hear us? We want to be sure you can hear.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, we can't see your video. Just want to be sure you don't think it's on. Oh, okay, good. All right, that's cool. All right, thanks, Babatunde. But before I go into the questions, just a gentle reminder for for people to drop their questions in the Q&A box, or if you have general comments, you can drop them in the chat box as well. All right, Linda, your country recently had, I don't want to say marvelous, I don't want to say crazy, I don't want to say interesting. I'll leave that for you to kindly explain. But your country recently had an election, and we talked about electoral reform. What do you make of the recently concluded election in Kenya and the implications for Africa, but also what young people on this call can take away from it, just to set off into the conversation?
Yes, thank you very much. And we did recently just had an election. Now, the presidential election has been challenged at the Supreme Court, so we're not sure whether it's past election or we are still in an electioneering period. So right now, the country is in a very interesting place as we wait for the decision of the Supreme Court regards the presidential election per se. However, if I go towards to speak about the election in general and what everyone saw, for the first time, we were proud as Kenyans because of how transparent the counting of the votes was. So much so that there was a buzz in Eastern Africa. Everyone, the Ugandans and Tanzanians, were so invested in talking about the Kenyan election. And you have to have background knowledge of this region to understand why there was that much of excitement. This is unheard of, that a citizen, an African citizen, will have access to the platform where votes are being counted. Votes are being counted in the open. They are uploaded on our website and everybody has access to it. And everyone is given access to count on their own, to have your own tally. So everyone had their own tallies. And of course, if you're from whichever party you're supporting, your count will favor them. But it really surprised even us that the site never once went down. It was very strong, it was open, and it helped in calming people's, negative, let me say, spirit. Kenya has very emotional elections. And if you look online, you'd see how Nigerians like to call Kenyans timid. We are quiet. But when you touch on elections, that's when you get to see how people are divided. And like any other African people, we are divided in tribal lines. But what we saw and what we learned was that, transparency can work. There's some things we speak of, and for us African people, we feel like can never happen in our continent, but it can work. It is possible to have a free and fair election. It is possible to have, to calm people's excitements and to avoid violence, so long as people feel they are part of the process, so long as people see the transparency, so long as you know that I'll cast my vote and it will make an impact and I'll be able to see where it goes, will go a long way. And those were very many lessons to African people and young people. So because of how invested everyone was in the counting, there was no violence. The environment was calm, but something negative on the other side was there was a very low turnout, especially of the younger generation, Gen Z, if I'm permitted to say. So much so that people say, oh, so Gen Z, you were just shouting online, but you didn't intend to vote. But other people are saying it was a silent protest, that you've witnessed so much failure and you have given up on the system and you do not see the point of engaging. You may look at it both ways, being disinterested or it being a silent protest against poor governance and saying, I do not wish to be part of you and I will not engage in it. The impact of that kind of silent protest, we don't know, where to see, but for the first time, that was something we witnessed and it shocked the world. And I think that's also another lesson for the rest of Africa to vote. We know everyone speaks about how, the future is young and that all our politicians love to, say the way they respect young people and they want to work with us for us, but we rarely get to see them, make these promises in action when they get into power. So this is young people telling politicians that we can actually ignore you, even if you are corrupt, even if you break the systems, we will fight even in a silent way that something you cannot take away is my right to vote, or I can choose to vote or refuse to vote. So
interesting. I mean, Kenya is always an interesting political space. And I think the election, as you said, reflects a lot of things. First, majority of the conversation that pretty much shaped this election were driven by young people online, in the streets as well. But eventually, a lot of them didn't turn out. So that's kind of interesting. And the reason why I say it's even more interesting these days is, as you guys know, the case of Tunisia, where they recently had a referendum, I think it was like last month, and the youth pretty much didn't go and vote in the referendum. They boycotted the referendum, and the president is now pretty much a lifetime president. So in that case, people, if they had turned out, young people had turned out and rejected the constitutional overhaul of the government, maybe the Tunisian president wouldn't be a lifetime president now. So it's always interesting when you have that kind of voter apathy. But Akintunde, so you heard Linda make mention of how electronic transmission of votes was key to the free and fair outcome of the election in Kenya. Your country, Nigeria, I think recently approved that as well. But as we've seen in some elections in the country, and in fact, outside of Nigeria, in places like Zambia, for example, where these reforms, electronic transmission of results, certain reforms to curb excesses of the Electoral Commission haven't really helped people have deep trust in the electoral system compared to what people are doing in Kenya. So do you think these reforms are useful in any way? And if they are, what are the other avenues for this reform? Because a lot of people on this call are in the civil society, and we'd like to know what these avenues are for us to go and advocate.
Right. I thank you very much, Ibrahim. And I, Linda, it's nice to hear your perspective about the Kenyan election. And I agree that when a system no longer serves the people it was created to serve, then there tends to be some certain actions, and especially at the moment in the continent, a lot of young people are not happy about the realities in the country. So they tend to start to organize. And one interesting way they start to organize or to show their differences would be online ranting, social media. They tend to say, okay, yeah, I remember just shortly before the Kenyan election, there was a lot of young people, a lot of protests saying that when they don't have food, they won't vote. You know, that way, no food, no food votes, that kind of thing. So you would see that here, a lot of people, young people are not happy with, the current system, and they are trying to disrupt the space. Back to your question about electronic transmission of election, I think the fundamental reason why uh, Africa is what it is today would be because there is almost no consequence for wrongdoing, in the continent. So if you do bad, if you're a terrible leader, if you steal money, if you enrich your people, there is almost a certainty that you would still retain government power if you so wish. You would. Africa is perhaps the only continent today that where you see a government called, in quotes, a democratic government, but it's autocratic in practice. The way they run their affairs. We have governments in Africa, countries in Africa where they've had presidents since 30, 40 years ago, and they still the president. It's that bad. So when we look at the process that helps to talk about democracy and the choices that comes with democracy, we say, see, this is a government that is driven by the people, that is for the people, and that allows people to take decisions about who becomes their leader. Then it has to be that process itself should be democratic, and it should also allow, or should also flow with the time. Uh, electoral malpractices has been a big challenge. In Nigeria, for instance, it's almost certain that if you are a sitting government, if you want to determine who becomes what during the election, you would always use the machinery of the state to influence whatever happens. If you are not able to do this, we have people who could immediately steal ballot boxes. We have people who could immediately, just duplicate the ballot boxes that you have. But when we talk about electronic voting and how that can help sanitize that process and ensure that people's voices are heard, then I think the example from developed countries that shows that, see, if you vote at the moment, we could electronically transmit the election on a server. And then we should also ensure that this server is protected against infiltration and being compromised, so that we could ensure that we maintain the integrity of the process. How better is that in Africa at the moment? I think that becomes a question again. Do we have such machinery? There are some countries, in Kenya, we could see there was a particular report that I read that says during the election that the results being uploaded from the back end got compromised at some point, and then it has to be reviewed again. So you could then start to talk about how much do we trust the politics and the policies that enable electronic vote, electronic transmission of results. But I agree with you that yes, it would help in a good way to allow non-state actors to track and monitor election outcomes. If election is happening across polling units and there is real-time, transmission of results from the polling, and the back and the front end, people are able to monitor, then you could easily predict, that, see, bearing a last minute change, XYZ persons will emerge as whatever that means. So you could immediately monitor, and you could all, say, and you also have independent observers who can also use their own machinery to do a voting tabulation to track. I remember in 2019 in Nigeria, general election in Nigeria, I was working in institutional room. So we deployed people to go monitor elections, there was no electronic transmission of result at the time in Nigeria, but at the situation room for my organization, we continue to feed a spreadsheet. So we have list of top candidates, and we continue to track out. And when we were setting that at some point, you know, the candidate who was leading by a certain percentage, we could project and say this guy is set to win the election by XYZ margin. When the final result was eventually announced, we were almost right. You know, we were almost right. So this also, so technology could, in a lot of ways, enhance the integrity and even make sure that people even trust the process that enables, you know, electoral process to flow. I know that I've spent a long time speaking about this, but I'll just go ahead so we can.
I mean, that's really insightful. It's really insightful because it's really challenging to have these innovations. I mean, technology is really great. Electronic transmission is really great. However, it's also an avenue for people to still vote. I mean, as you said, in the case of Kenya, there was a concern that the thing was compromised. Even in the US, we have a party crying until today that the whatever, I don't want to mention, the voting system was compromised. So even the most advanced countries, quote unquote, is still struggling with that. But as you said, these are reforms that we really need. But before I go to my next question, I see that we already have some questions in the chat box. I want to encourage people to keep them coming. By the time we reach the hour mark, we're going to start taking your questions. So please keep the questions coming. But Linda, so this is going to be a controversial question. I'm not against democracy. I'm just against the kind of democracy that isn't democratic enough. You can say your election was free and fair, but to what extent does it reflect the people's true will? Because, for example, in cases like, you know, like the one we have in Kenya, the two people, is it I forgot the first name, Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga has been there. Odinga has been there forever. And you can argue that, of course, he has the popularity, but also the money. The two political candidates have the money. And I do not know to what extent your electoral umpire filter to make sure that, you know, people don't take illegal money to use to campaign. But you can argue that in Africa, the people that often make it to the podium are those who have the financial backing illegally, because, you know, people have to contribute, but people don't really contribute to electoral campaigns on the continent. But again, to what extent do you think this kind of election, like the one you have in Kenya, the one that's going to be coming up in Nigeria, the one they had in Zambia, in Zimbabwe a couple of years ago, to what extent do you think these are reflective of the people's will, or we are just being forced to decide between two people or three people who should be our leader? I mean, you're a lawyer, so you understand this question more.
Indeed, a very controversial question. And whether the Kenyan election, whether it was free and fair, that is difficult to say, as you mentioned, because of those issues. But let's just say, like, we've made progress, that technology has helped us see an aspect of the counting. At least we can say, for instance, it was more credible somehow. Now, as you're speaking, how do we make sure that through the vote, this is the voice of the people? And I think one problem we face in Africa, it's the elephant of the room, is corruption, which is so fundamental into all aspects of governance. And so long as corruption thrives, we can't say for sure that, you know, whenever, in the case of elections, when people vote, that is their voice. Why? Because we have weak systems. Corruption weakens systems, including the electoral system. So, as you said, in such a case, we actually had more than two presidential candidates. So at first there were more, but at the end of it, we had about 4 candidates. 2 of them were standing out, of course, the former vice president and Raila Odinga, who people have been saying he has been contesting for, this was about, if I'm not wrong, maybe the 5th time he's contesting. He is also the son of a former vice president of the first government. So he comes from, in Kenya, we now call them, he's a dynasty person. And then you have someone who is from the previous government and also who benefited from a second President Moi's government and that controversy around. Then you have the other 2 people One of them was popular among young people. He was campaigning, he was heavy on campaigning for legalization of marijuana, and we had a pastor. So you see, if you're an African, you just look at it and you know who are the top two. Why is it obvious that there are top two out of those four? And it's, as you said, it's very difficult to even say whether was this my voice. Now, there's something people, there are different ways people vote. For instance, here, people in most places vote for a party. So we have, I think we were given 6 ballot papers for 6 different positions. So there is this statement that he said, vote 6 Ps. This means you vote 6 people for one party in all those positions. Why? So that the party can have representatives in parliament, and they can win, or they can have their people and have their motions go ahead. So this has been taught to our people so much so that there are places where their own free will doesn't even have a chance. They don't have a chance to think about it or look at the candidates and consider who is the better of them all, who fits my interest better. They're thinking of that general thing that is told over and over like a broken record. We need to vote 6 Ps. So I'm already under some sort of duress when I'm voting, because I'm not really thinking of my own personal interest, where I live, where my future of my children, the kind of life I want to live. And as you said, and then there's money. So other candidates, political candidates, some people in different locations. I'll give you if I have the time. A brother to a friend of mine was contesting for a member of county assembly. So it's not it's like the entry level position. It's very low. So he on the ground, in Kenya, we like to say on the ground, like in the people, he was popular. And he was hopeful that he was going to win. So this is an ordinary family, they fundraised, people have brought money together for this guy to contest. And he's young, he's like, maybe he's not yet 30. Unfortunately, days to the election, a contestant who is a local of the area they come from was giving out about $10 per house, per person. And the result was he lost. So it was difficult to see, and this is a very common thing around the country. Like in many cases, we find that money, people sell their votes for the sake of money. Whether at the ballot, they'll actually choose for the person who gives the money, we can't know. But indeed, that sort of corruption interferes with the people's choice. So as I said, it's very difficult, even where we are able to see people voting and the system is fine. If the process itself is compromised throughout, in the campaigning period, also in the party level, people are bought out of getting a party ticket. So you and I could be in this party called ODM, it's popular. So they have a very bad reputation of the person with the highest amount will get the paper. And I've seen something similar in Nigeria, where I don't know, Banky W he was supposed to get a candidacy for one party, and he apparently won, and after some recount, he lost it, and that's common here as well. So you find people who they're not even politicians or or good quality people, they buy those candidacy of their political parties. So our issues are multifaceted because we allow corruption to manifest. And I think, as I began with, if we don't fight corruption, then it is very difficult to say that people are executing their voice when they vote.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sorry case because, as you said, we have to fight this kind of corruption, but what can the people do? That's the question. The individuals in power giving us this technology, electoral reforms, are also the people compromising the whole system. So how can you trust the problem to be the solution in itself? So it's a catch-22 situation. But I want to go over some comments before I ask Akintunde the next question. So we have this from Jamli Kogi. They say the transparency was good. That's referring to Kenya. Countries should adopt a good electoral system based on blockchain technology. Okay, for future elections, blockchain facilitates transparency and verifiability. All right, that makes sense. Or I'd like to know what people think about that. There is also this one from Brian Kipchumba. They say I am from Kenya, and I want to agree with Linda that we had a better organized electoral process this time, despite the few itches she highlighted. Yeah, okay, that's correct. So I think this question is what I want to use to segue into my question for Akintunde. And this is from Amindo Alsame. They are from Angola. They say, hello leaders, recently we had election in Angola and the results wasn't accepted. The points are, one, where can we attack to change the situation? What are the electoral reforms? So electoral reform generally. So Akintunde, my question to add to what Amindo is saying would be the role of the civil society. As Linda said, people's voices aren't being reflective in the election. Like the two people who made it to the podium in Kenya, likely you can argue is because of money and political influence. So in some regard, that doesn't reflect what people actually want. Only being presented with two options. So do you think there could be certain specific reforms that could prevent this forcing of candidates upon people? For example, in the US, in the state of Alaska, the election is totally different. You know, America is pretty much divided between Democrat and Republican, but you are being forced, even if you're a Democrat, to vote Republican and to vote so the system is such that they have, like, I think 7 or 4 people on the ballot, Republican, Democrat, Independent. But you as an individual, you have to vote top 3. So even if you are the Republican and you choose 2 Republican, you'll have to vote 1 Democrat. So in that situation, they have people go beyond party line to accept and be much more less politically insulated. So Babatunde, what are those specific reforms that you think we can actually use to prevent this forcing of individuals, 2 people, 3 people, upon electorates on the continent?
Thank you. I mean, when you're talking about the United States, and I was smiling because I as much as I try to talk about Africa, I think the system in the United States is totally different. You know, there are problems. So what drives election conversation in the US and developed countries? They are not bad roads. They are not poverty. They are not like people are not able to afford $1 a day or something. People in Africa have different realities. Basic things are not existent. So when we talk of how do we forcing influential members of the elites, on people, I think the fundamental factor that would reform electoral decisions or whatever in Africa would be for us to first fix poverty. When people, like Linda was making reference to a particular candidate who was paying people $10 few days to election. That is weaponization of poverty. When you're certain that, for instance, the word poverty law creates that when people are not able to afford, banks says when people are not able to afford $1.9 a day, then they are extremely poor. How many people in Africa are able to afford that? And you have also, can you hear me okay? I think my internet is acting up. Can you hear me okay? Right. So people in Africa are poor, and that affects their electoral choices. That's one. The second thing is that the elites are established. They control the system. So it is difficult for reforms that are a lot of independent electoral commission in court, they are not independent. They're still answerable to the government. And because they rely on renewal of their terms or their loyalty. So we first have to start questioning the loyalty of electoral umpires. Is their loyalty to sitting government or to the states or to citizens? So those things have to be clear. Now we'll talk about electoral reforms and the role technology would play. To a greater extent, I agree that it's important for us to start looking at how do we, digitize electoral process. How do we I'm trying to put off my video because of the internet. I'm not sure. But if it's okay now, you could, if it's fine, I could just put it on. So if we have a process where people as are able to, like, vote, and if they're able to vote and they could monitor, then we could then look at how can they track the electoral process. Now the question then becomes the choice of candidates. Main political parties still decide, no matter how digitized the process is. Main political parties still decide who becomes their flag bearer. So you don't have so the point then becomes just people who believe that they are angry and they are not happy with the existing system. They then have to disrupt this space. When young people are hungry, let your hunger revolve beyond social media rants. Africa has about 60 to 70% of its population as young people. If the reality is that when you have less popular candidates from the, let me say, from the third branch, so you have a sitting government, you have the main opposition, and they decide who becomes their flag bearer. Whoever becomes their flag bearer, it's not a mistake. They would be part of the establishment.
Right.
So if you want to then let your own voice be reflected, then we need to have a candidate that will be representing the young people's constituency. And this is not necessarily supposed to be a new political party. Get me right. If you have, let me use Nigeria, for example. You have two major political parties, and then you have other political parties. But this is a country where a majority of the population are young people. Can young people unite in purpose and decide without, and this is practical, and I keep saying it. You have to decide and say, see, between now and the next 10 years, you don't organize for an election that will happen in 2023, in 2022. That is impossible. You need to build a formidable structure. Then in your number, when you have a clear ideology driving whatever you want to do, in your numbers, join the main political parties and disrupt their decision-making process. If you join these guys, and you have to be deliberate. Young people who want to disrupt, so we don't continue to say, oh, they are forcing candidates on us. If we know that the new parties that we would be creating, they won't spread to the length and breadth of our country. And the people who would vote, see, if it is raining, old mamas, old papas, our grandmothers would vote. They would, it's just natural for them. But young people will be busy on social media. So the era of staying online and complaining should no longer be involved.
Right. Social media.
What you start doing is that you have to marry, in digital advocacy, there is something we call digital counter public space. That is a space where young people are united by common suffering. But now you have to bring your online agitation to mobilize and be part of the electoral process. It is not sufficient to get your voter registration card. It is not sufficient. You have to join those political parties.
Yeah, people have to join. We have to walk the talk.
It's right. You have to walk the talk. And another point is that you have to join these. And sometimes it is if you read Obama's Promised Land, if you read the trajectory and how he was able to dominate the political space, you would see that he was showing up at every step of the way. Oh, there was a Congress, a national Congress, and he was going to deliver a speech. But before they identified that he was going to deliver a speech, he was part of the establishment. He emerged from the pool of existing political parties.
Right.
While that may be, so the question then becomes, young people must be intentional. And so that by the time they are nominating people to be part of the electoral body, you are also nominated, or someone that is young. And then you all have to be deliberate and intentional. Sometimes young people will organize, but they will be divided when they are sharing proceeds from political leaders.
Right.
That should no longer be divided.
Right. So I think it's really necessary that young people become part of it. See, personally, I don't like joining politics, right? I like doing the advocacy. And I think it's the same for a lot of people. I mean, young people in Africa are not so reticent when it comes to political activism. We saw what happened in Sudan. Young people was aware that brought about the change in Sudan, in Kenya today, in Nigeria, in Zambia. But I just don't know. We don't want to join political parties, and I understand that. But as you said, that could be a case to make for us to join political parties. But I think it can be so challenging. But
we don't necessarily have to join to be part of it. But so the point is that when we have someone who represents our ideals, can we mobilize and support this person and stay true to the cause?
Yeah, I guess that's the challenge. Maybe fundraising or something could work. But anyway, I want us to get to some questions before we go to the second part of the conversation. So, Linda, we have a few questions from Kenya. So this is from Joy Achungo. I think we have like three from Kenya. So if you can kindly do a fabricate. So from Joy Achungo, they say, do you feel that the current economic crisis contributed to the low voter turnout? I guess we have had huge blows from COVID to the loss of jobs to the rising cost of living. Linda, I'm going to answer that in a minute.
Wow, yeah. So I read the question and I was like, indeed, that's something to really think about. And weeks or days to the election, we were having protests by people in the streets that were, calling the attention of the government to the food crisis. So like most African countries, Nigerians call it swallow. Here we have a meal that is a staple ugali. And it's like a swallow made from maize flour. So this is very popular in East and Southern African countries. And in the supermarkets, there was a shortage. We've also had poor rain performance in the region. So this affected growth of crops and cultivation, contributing to now lack of the flour that people need to make the meal in the supermarkets. Inflation came, and I think in a year, we've seen prices change for fuel, which affects all aspects of our life.
Right.
Maybe 3 to 4 times. So it's like every time we were going to the stores, prices were going higher and higher and higher, up until a point that some food commodities were missing in the stores. So people actually, remember, we have a lot of our people who live below the poverty line, as Akin was explaining. So these are people who are casual laborers. They are being paid per day. Maybe you're being paid about $4. Let me give a rough number, $4. And you need to buy, these people, they buy food per day. They break down their expense in daily packages. So in the current economy, what will this family buy or live out? And they have children, they have school fees, right? They cannot even afford, every other day you go and board your bus and the fuel price has gone up, meaning the cost has gone high. So the pressure was so much. COVID also happened, as she mentioned. And during COVID, something interesting that we've never witnessed was there was a tax, the government reduced the VAT by, I think, 2% or so. So while it was a small percentage, it eased the economy in a way. And immediately things looked like they were back to normal. All that tax was brought in, and in fact, we even got newer tax brackets were brought in. So currently there is so much stress on all of us. Middle class people are struggling to manage, and everyone is changing their expenses. But the low income earners are finding it very, very hard. And that could be something that, people were left to think, I'm hungry and I can relate my hunger to bad governance. We saw our newspapers filled with cases of corruption and billions of, Kenyan shillings being stolen and nothing is happening. So the frustration from the hunger, from the corruption witnessed, led people to just give up and not decide to vote. Because to them, they didn't see how voting will change their current situation. And from the options that we had in the case of Kenya, it was either status quo be maintained or things become worse. So then, you just choose to give up and not engage because you don't see any promise of any sort of change happening through the ballot. So,
that's really bad because what is election supposed to do? Is it supposed to help us change our if we are dissatisfied with the government, we change it through election. But for people to be so tired, so much that they don't want to vote, I mean, that's really, really sad. And it's across the continent. But anyway, I want you all to also help us kindly answer this question from Alex Oburu. They say the biggest issue that has led to Gen Z not voting is the lack of civil education. For the longest time, up to 1990, in the old curriculum in Kenya, students will be taught civil education, and it's transformed them to be interested and consistent in matters related to governance. So the question is, do you guys think the government is playing games to ensure that the power remains within areas who can protect their interests? I think this is an amazing question, that the systemic corruption is not only about paying at the police station or sacking electoral umpires, but preventing people from also understanding their civic rights and responsibilities and their history to influence their thinking about elections. So I think this should apply to the two of you, but we have to keep it at 1 minute each so we can go to the next phase of questions. So
okay.
Linda, okay. 1 minute. Do you think that is it a conspiracy theory, or you think that's true?
I will come in here, and maybe I'll remind the person who asked the question, and maybe ask here, if you were privy to the Kenyan election of 2017, it was a dark time. It was the first time we ever saw our TV stations being shut down. That doesn't happen in Kenya. You know, Kenya is, we love to believe that we are a bit better in terms of some practices, but because of the election was highly contested, and you know, it was seen that the vote was stolen, and especially the decision of the Supreme Court then that overturned the election. The government reacted by turning off our TV stations. Like, we couldn't, and we had to go to the social media like YouTube to be able to access what the media houses were airing. And the media houses that were airing the events that were happening, some of those people were really threatened by the government. You know, some people were fired, and it was so bad. And I remember during that time, maybe there was a reason why this year there hasn't been a lot of voter education. So I remember that time there were some organizations that were engaged in civic engagement, you know, talking about elections, and there was a clapback, a serious clapback by the government to even deregister some of those organizations. You know, those who had foreign employees were sent out of the country, you know, visas were overturned. So there was an attack on non-governmental organizations at that time that were seen to be, at that time they were saying that, you know, you're against the government, you know, I don't know even how to frame it. So I think this time there was a reaction against what was seen. Nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of the government. So unfortunately, there's an aspect of fear, especially with non-governmental organizations. They didn't want to get into trouble with the government, so decided not to engage in any voter education or anything to do with elections, and they stepped out. And on the side of the government, indeed, there's some truth there. I remember a long time ago, there used to be voter education on what it means to vote. And this time I remember, I don't remember seeing the electoral body teaching people how to vote. Maybe that's just me, but there was a time a campaign was also on the TVs where you were shown which one is the right mark, which one is the wrong mark. And if you make a wrong mark, yeah, which one means your vote won't be counted and all that, you know, how to avoid being bribed. But we didn't see that happening this time.
Right. I mean, of course, these are institutions run by the state. So if I'm sorry to say, the Uhuru Kenyatta doesn't think it's going to benefit his party, I think he wouldn't ask that the electoral power to go and do what they should be doing on TV by educating people. And of course, I think you guys also have a national orientation agency or something like that should also be doing similar stuff. But again, politics is politics. But Akintunde, I want to get your response to that, but also join it with this question from Miriam Oguremi, who says that how can we Nigerians turn our elections away from the usual issue-based to idea-based ahead of 2023 elections? So can you answer that in 2 minutes or one? And I hate the fact that we are only getting this to Nigeria and Kenya, but I guess those are critical examples as well.
Right. I get that. So the first thing is that I'm not certain that the fact that we don't have civic engagement as part of curriculum, I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. But even if it is, if it was, my sense is that what will drive people to be interested in politics in the 21st century is poverty. So when you know that, you know, because the reason why people are not able to live to the best of their lives because they have terrible government in power. And that would trigger some dissatisfaction with the system. The reason why a lot of Nigerians today are happily going to get their PVC will be because today a dollar goes for about 650 naira, exchange rate. So cost of living, so Nigeria is suffering from hyperinflation. It is projected that about 92 million Nigerians will be living in extreme poverty by the end of 2022. So Nigerians are now seeing that, see, if we continue, Nigerians cannot travel between Abuja, in the Federal Capital Territory, and Kaduna, a neighboring city, without fear of being kidnapped or abducted by gunmen. So they are now saying that the reason why this is happening will be because government that they have in power is irresponsible. So what is driving political consciousness is now poverty, is insecurity. And I think so, if they are deliberate about removing civic engagement from the curriculum because they don't want people to be interested in politics, now the consequence of their own irresponsible governance is now the trigger for that is now inspiring civic consciousness in young people. Now, Miriam's question about I'm just trying to scroll to the question so I could
I remember the question because already answered. So yeah, let me repeat it. It's about how young people could influence politics to be from issue-based to idea-based.
Right. So to remove the lack of depth and lack of content, lack of quality conversation, during political engagement, to something that deals with, okay, what are the top 5 issues affecting Nigerians, and how do we make this a front-burning conversation during political debate? I think one thing that we have to start doing is to, one, when we have, these political office holders, people seeking political offices, when they start their campaign, young people in their numbers bombard the venue, and with your placard, go there.
Wait, aren't they already there? I mean, a lot of these people at the campaign are young people, but
so they should go there and ask all the questions. That's one. Number 2, sponsor airtime on TV. Go on TV, young people. Have a rep, go on TV and be talking about the issues that are important to Nigerians. Young people should go to people who are politically conscious, go to political gatherings, go and chant and sing about the issues that are affecting you, unemployment, poverty, and what have you. At this point, it is not a time to be quiet. It is not a time to be. It's not a time to be passive about this process.
You know the funny thing that Akintunde, I'm very sure you remember during the independence wave, the people who actually brought about independence are young people. I mean, I studied Africanism from
and they use the media
they started a media organization. They created their own media organization.
Of course, they created the media. So now we have social media, right? But we have to take this. We have to go on radio. So if political office holders are spending 30 minutes on radio for their own campaign, go and do the same thing. Spend 37 minutes to speak about the issues they talk about. On election day, when protect your vote, don't just vote and go back home for DSTV. And no. When you're done, sit there. See the energy that young people use to campaign for people to go get their PVC in Nigeria as a case study. They should use it. The energy that young people in Kenya used to say no food, no vote. Use the same energy to protect your vote.
Exactly.
I think from there, these guys will know that if they are not doing anything, there is a consequence, and that would trigger, responsible leadership.
Honestly, I really hope people can because I remember if you look at the history of independence movement, a lot of these people didn't have social media. They created their own newspaper. They went into politics. They went to school, they organized themselves. That organizing themselves, that is the key issue. And I hope our people across the continent can learn from this. And of course, your point about, making sure the election polls are secured. We can learn a great lesson from Zambia and how they threw out the last president, I think last year. But anyway, so I think this is a good segue to the next question about limited governments. But before I ask that question, we have a lot of questions on the chat box, and I don't think we have time to take all of them. So I'll just encourage you, Linda and Akintunde, to please drop your Twitter Andrew, if you have your DMs open so that folks can ask this question, or if you don't have your DMs open, maybe drop your email if you're comfortable. But I think this is a good segue to how politicians today are pretty much using the public's desperation. As you said, Linda, the public is poor. They want change so desperately, and we've seen that these leaders are using those pretexts to assume more power. Okay, so the country is going bad. We need economic reform, but the parliament is not doing enough. So let's abolish the parliament. That is what Tunisia's president did, and we are seeing this being replicated across the continent. So, do you think? What are the ways you think you can make our institutions stronger, not make our leaders stronger, but institutions stronger, so we can curb the excesses of big governments, excessively powerful individuals? So institutional reforms, Linda, what do you think we should start? And if you can do that in a minute, I'm actually doing a minute this time around, please.
Okay.
Institutional
okay. So maybe I'll just use one answer for that, and it is constitutional reform. There is no other way. If you amend amending the constitution means going, doing a whole election again and agreeing on what part of the constitution are you changing. But since the constitution is the supreme law of the land, it is what informs it's what gives birth to institutions. And I think through the constitution we can limit government, and we can ensure that we have independent institutions.
But let's one point. So constitution, and I'm saying it because you're a lawyer.
Yes.
So constitutions, whose constitution? Is it colonially created constitution? But you can even argue that many of African countries now do have constitutions that are not from the colonial era or the first decade of independence. But a lot of these constitutions are still designed the same way the American and the European constitutions are designed. Why can't we have our own variants of African, because customs and traditions were the basis of our own laws back then. So when you say constitutional reforms, let's have that Africa in mind. How do you think we should do that?
Yeah, by having ensure, okay, maybe let me give you the case of Kenya, for example. We have a new constitution, we call it new constitution of 2010. And in order for us to create this constitution, it took years of trial and error and failure until we got first a government that was willing to entertain the conversation of amending the constitution. And second, it took a lot of research and borrowing from around the continent. Okay, some people say it's a copy of the South African constitution, but there's some things, okay, indeed, we retain our colonial history, but it has some changes that are unique to it. And we usually say, if you look at the Kenyan constitution as it is, if you implement it as is designed, Kenya will be a very better country. But because of this, the politicians have seen the loopholes, and we've been seeing over years going many attempts with the politicians to kill the constitution or weaken it, in order for them to, of course, continue being corrupt and especially limit the independence of our institutions. So you see, from the document as it is possible. And if it is carefully designed, and when you're writing down the constitution, ensuring that different classes of people are represented in the body that designs the constitution, it can go a long way in ensuring that when it comes to institutions, which institutions do you need in a country? How do you create them? Who are the members of these institutions? Is there representation, gender balances, and all that? Mm-hmm. So it's a long shot, but you see, if you enable an institution via the constitution, the challenge then becomes how to create it and implement it. But at least the constitution gives it, that power to be created there.
Right. I really hope that we can give equal energy to election as to constitution as we do election. We always talk about election or party politics or whatnot, but the constitution is the bedrock. So if we can keep a vigilant eye on that, as you said, Linda, I think we'll be in a good place as young Africans. But Akintunde, I wanted you to help answer this question. So we've seen that government's power has been seriously elevated since COVID started. They shut down the governments, started borrowing more money, implementing martial regimes, in short, expanding the reach and powers of the government. But we know that limited governments can work. So what do you think are the best ways for governments to to get money apart from going to borrow? To say, oh, we need money to solve COVID economic crisis. We need to go and borrow from China or whatnot. What are these avenues do you think we can achieve our economic reality without expanding our deficit or, over bloating government? Akintunde, in a minute.
Right. You see, and it's unfortunate that I just have to talk about this in 1 minute. But one thing I of course want to talk about is that African leaders are not innovative. A lot of them. A lot of African.
All of them, or a specific number?
A number of them. A number of them. And I say this because I'm just being magnanimous, I'm being magnanimous with my generalization. That's one thing. The second thing is that we are not seeing the potential in Africa ourselves. I think the West, developed nations, see the potential in Africa more than African leaders see the potentials in Africa. And you would also notice that a lot of young people in Africa now, the future of Africa, the immediate ambition for them is no longer to become lawyers or to become tech professionals. Even if their immediate ambition is to become tech professionals or to become lawyers or become medical professionals, the next ambition will be to leave Africa and travel abroad. And why? Because there is an enabling environment for whatever they have studied to thrive there. So the way we can, one, advance the economy of Africa, the African Union Commission building, where it is at the moment, is being funded by China.
Exactly. They're running Chinese empires across the continent. Even the African Union Assembly was created by China.
Of course, a lot of infrastructural projects going on in some African countries are being funded by China. And there is also the power of the West, on other things. Africa is a consuming economy, is an importing economy.
Right.
And you have a continent that has the potential to become the world power in the nearest future. Why do you not start producing what you already have to service your continent and to export so you can earn more? Why do you believe that handout is the only guarantee for development? I mean, I was reading Dead Aid when I was in graduate school. Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo, where she had argued against the fact that, see, we can't continue this way. But the question becomes, when are African leaders going to admit? When African leaders meet developed leaders,
right?
Do you know what the agenda will be?
We know they talk about
yes, forgiveness, we grant, will be all of those things. Let's start electing innovative leaders.
Hopefully at that.
Who can see that the future of Africa is in Africa, and Africa has got the potential to not only disrupt Africa, but to disrupt the world and to lead the world. That's it for them.
A lot of promise. I hope Akintunde's energy radiates throughout the room and everybody take charge. But Linda, we're out of time. 10 seconds, your final comment. 10 seconds, please.
Wow. So honestly, we do have a long way to go. There's so much has been said. You've left us hanging. There's so many points. I was bursting out of comments to interject Akintunde and yourself. But you began by saying our audience is of young people, and you even invite speakers who are under 40. I do believe that we are the future. And instead of limiting our arguments to panels and on social media, we need to decide and find where we can actually make a difference. What is it that we can do? Is it voting? Is it joining politics as a leader? Is it creating organizations? So indeed, if we want to see a better Africa, we should stop continuing to expect the West to do it for us or going to borrow aid to come and resolve our situations. And as you said, electoral reform is at the heart of democracy. So it's time for us to put our hands where to make a difference and play our part as much as we can in all walks of life. Yeah.
Absolutely support that. And as the old saying goes, be the change you want to see in the world. Thank you, Akintunde Babatunde and Linda Kavuka, for joining us for this conversation, and my colleague Faith Omoni for running tech. And to all the people who joined, all the questions, I'm so sorry we couldn't take all your amazing questions, and read out your comments, but please reach out to Akintunde and Linda for them to help you understand these questions better. And yeah, this is where we anchor the sheet. Thank you so much for making this a memorable webinar. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.